You're listening to English Academy, Platzi's English podcast. Learn about different topics as you improve your English listening skills. Join Platzi and have access to courses on product design, audiovisual production, data science, business, English, marketing, and more. Enjoy this week's episode.
Welcome to English in Action, a podcast by Platzi English Academy. I'm Waira, English Program Manager at Platzi, and I will be your host today. Remember to go to platzi.com/learnpodcast and take this week's free class. Today, I have invited Gina, our in-house English teacher, and we'll be talking about how to learn English with podcasts. Hi, Gina, how are you?
Hi, Waida. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay, of course, Gina. Well, you know I love podcasts, and I love teaching English. So today is our moment to talk about podcast and teaching English.
The perfect combination for you.
For me. What about for you? Are you also a podcast fan or not so much?
Well, we talked about this behind the scenes. I do enjoy them, but I have to say I'm much more of a video consumer. So I love listening to content, but I also like seeing. I'm a very visual person and visual learner. So I think we are more in your territory, but definitely something that I also enjoy, and I do want to recommend our students because it's a very valuable tool for learning the language.
Absolutely. And I think some tips that we can give to learn English with videos apply to podcasts, right?
They do, yes.
Yeah. So let's start there. Why do you consider podcasts can help learn English?
Well, it's not, I guess, a secret that most of our learners want to improve their listening skills, but also their speaking. And you can do both with podcasts, of course, listening, but when you have enough, let's say, exposure to a certain type of content, you start to absorb that as well. So that's called acquisition. You start to acquire certain elements of what you are consuming. And the great thing about this is that, of course, if you're listening to native speakers, you start to acquire a more natural accent as well and pronunciation. You start to identify different sounds that native speakers use. So that's a very valuable resource you can get from podcast. Definitely. Not the only two skills, but let's say two main skills that you can improve by listening to podcasts.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, G. Definitely. And I think you can improve, as you mentioned, all the different skills, actually. I think you can improve your grammar, your vocabulary, you can improve your listening, your writing, your speaking. It just depends on the approach you take, right, towards podcasts.
That's right.
So in which skills should we start? Which one do you want us to start? And we share some tips, some ideas.
Well, you mentioned writing, and that's something that students will probably wonder, how can I improve writing if I'm listening to something? So I think we should start there.
I love that. You know, usually we think about writing like I need somebody there to tell me what to write about, how to write. And I think, of course, we have to know how to write, but we learn by writing, right? We can apply by doing it. So I think something that I've done that's worked for me, and I think it's very good, it's listening to a podcast, writing a summary, or writing your reflections about it, because there are podcasts about different topics, right? So right now, we are talking about how to learn with podcasts. Well, write your reflections about it if you're listening to this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Because you can practice, you know, having a journal, a podcast journal, let's call it. I'm going to give it that name right now.
I like that.
And there you can see how you apply your writing skills, and you can check your progress, right? And you can see how you wrote before and how you keep advancing. So
that's a great way to keep track of progress. Sometimes it's not that visible or not that tangible. We don't really consider, hey, have I improved in the past couple of weeks or months? Thanks to this tool or this class or this video, whatever it is, the resource that you're using for your learning process, it's good to analyze that and reflect on it. Have I made progress? Has this really helped me? You mentioned why maybe taking notes of your personal opinions and how you felt about the podcast. I also recommend taking notes on new vocabulary so that you expand and your personal dictionaries, right? Of the language that you are maybe more familiar, that you use on a daily basis. Well, if you're listening to academic podcasts, and not just academic, we have so many topics that I know you will mention in a little bit because you consume a lot. But we have so many topics that you will learn, I'm sure, at least one, if not like 10, 20, but at least one new word in every episode that you hear. So take note of that new vocabulary as well. And as a little extra challenge, try to use it yourself in another context, maybe with partners, colleagues, classmates, friends. Try to apply it.
I love that. I love that because definitely podcasts are a source of vocabulary about different topics, right? We'll go there in a minute, but yes, there are podcasts about basically anything you want, right?
Yes.
You're interested in cards? I'm sure you will find a podcast about cards. I don't know one, but probably you will find one. But that's a great tip. Write words. And I think this helps you, with your listening, you apply to writing patterns, like if I hear the word, I don't know, Maine, how do I write that? And then you start making those relations with words that sound similar, and you can go to an online dictionary and you can check, is it like this or is it written like that? And that can help you learn new vocabulary, but also start making relations in terms of pronunciation and writing, because we know in English works different than in Spanish, right?
It does.
So I think that's a great tool. It happens to me. I love doing that. Like, what is that word? Is it this one or that one? And then okay, it's this word. I learn it, and it's good to have, as you say, like a diary with new words. And of course, applying them, right? However, there is something that we call passive listening, and that also helps. What can you tell us about it? How can podcasts help us there? Like, what if I don't actively pay attention to it? Can it help me as well? Or do I need to have time to really take notes?
Well, I would say, and speaking from not just my point of view as a teacher, but also as a consumer of content online, that both are good. I don't think when you approach content online like podcasts or videos, TED Talks, all of this amazing, even our courses and our content online as well, I don't think you always need to have the pressure of being 100% focused, because that consumes energy, of course. And like Freddie was just mentioning a couple of minutes ago, it can also produce anxiety, wanting to know everything all the time and being up to date. So I think that you could do both. I think take a moment of your day, of your week, schedule it and say, I want to listen to this podcast because it's interesting, because I know I want to learn about this. I have my notebook. I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to reserve or book that space for my learning with this content. But then I think you should also have moments where you listen to it in the background while you're cooking or while you're taking a walk, walking your pets, your dogs. I think both are very valuable, and you will retain information, I'm sure, because you can't listen to it and not at least have a question about something that you just heard. Wait, did they just say this? Oh, wait, that's interesting. I hadn't heard. So you have the opportunity to pause, go back, and then pay more attention to that thing in specific. But I do believe that you can learn from both passive listening and focused listening.
I couldn't agree more with you, G. I totally agree, because sometimes if we think about, I need to have the time to actively take notes, maybe we don't have as much time, right? But I personally enjoy listening to podcasts when I'm cooking. You just mentioned it.
I knew that would be one. Yes.
But of course, if you're like Gina and you have pets, maybe when you go walk your pets, your cat, your cats. I don't know if people walk their cats.
I have seen people walk cats in the park. And you know what I saw this week?
What?
A person with a bunny.
Walking a bunny on
Not
a leash.
walking a bunny, but the bunny had a leash and they were sitting in a park bench. And I could not believe it, but it happens.
Well, it happens. It doesn't matter what pet you have, what pet you take to the park. That can be a good moment. And maybe with the dog you're playing, you need to be more active. But with a cat, with a bunny, well, you can pay attention to the podcast, right?
Yes, you're sitting in the bench, enjoying, taking in the sun, and listening and learning.
There you go. So whatever you do in your daily routine, you can incorporate them, and you can definitely take advantage of not thinking of them as I'm studying English, but I'm listening to something that I enjoy. It's part of my routine. And, listening without paying all the attention, without having all your attention there, helps you interiorize. If we think about how we learn when we are kids, a kid is not actively paying attention to the grammar and the vocabulary, right? But just by listening, they start understanding and incorporating the grammar and the vocabulary to their brain, right? So I think that's important. Passively listening to them, enjoy them. Enjoy listening to different topics.
And you mentioned something important, why that I want to continue there or mention is that it should be interesting to you. So it's not listening for the sake of listening and, this is like a self-imposed homework. No, but listening to something that you enjoy. So I like philosophy. We were talking about that recently. I like philosophy. Let me find a podcast on that topic. But let's say that you love dinosaurs and you're obsessed with them, then I'm sure you're going to find somebody that produces quality content about dinosaurs or history. So it's something that is interesting to you, because if you really like it, if you enjoy it, if it's something that sparks that intellectual interest and curiosity, then you're going to take it outside of the podcast, because you're going to read an article about it, because maybe something that you heard you didn't know and you say, oh, when did that happen? Let me check the date. So that takes you to other spaces, and then you can expand the knowledge, and you're still learning the language, right? But you're doing it in a way that seems more natural and more enjoyable.
Okay, G. I mean, this conversation is great because there are many ways in which you can use podcasts to learn, right? And it doesn't need to be this space of learning, studying, right? But it's just enjoyable, connected with your life. Now, why would you say, or what's the difference between learning with a podcast and music or movies? What would you say? Okay, why choosing a podcast instead of a song or movies?
Well, like I mentioned before, I am biased. I'm not so neutral because I love watching. I love seeing what's happening. But I do have to say that I do that more for entertainment, because I want to see, for example, in a movie, if somebody fell down, if something funny is happening, the actor is making a funny face, or maybe there are explosions. So for entertainment, I think, of course, having that visual element is great. But when it comes to learning, I do believe that focusing on just one, let's say, element, which is listening, allows you to be much more focused than if you have a lot of distractions on screen. Because you have to ask yourself, okay, if I want to learn with a video, am I really paying attention to what the speaker is saying, what they're explaining, how they are pronouncing? Or am I distracted by the animations and the colors? Look, this, that. So they both have advantages, but I believe that if you want to be a little bit more focused on improving these set of skills that we have discussed today, then choose something that eliminates so much stimuli, because you're receiving so much information at once that you might not be able to narrow it down or focus on one. So I would say podcasts do have that benefit. They have the benefit of making sure that you're just there in the conversation, in the talk, following the rhythm, the natural pace of the speaker, and not seeing something that could be distracting in many ways. And with songs, and this is something that I always tell my students, yes, music is amazing and you can learn a lot of things, but in pop culture, there is a lot of slang.
I think I know where you're going.
There is a lot of slang. There are a lot of bad words. It's very informal. Sometimes we don't use the correct grammatical structure. Well, not we, but artists, yes. They don't use the correct grammatical structure because it's not important for what they're producing. They're producing entertaining content, something that is catchy. They're more concerned about the rhythm and how impactful this is going to be than really in making sure that the language is used perfectly. And I have to say that I don't know which artists really I could recommend and that I would say, oh, yes, their English is perfect and they pronounce everything well and they have excellent grammar. I think that's not the purpose of music. It's to, touch your heart and your soul and to generate some emotions, but not to teach. So it's great. It's a fun way to start, but I think it could also be confusing and maybe you're going to learn other things. I don't know how useful, but you're going to learn about pop culture and slangs and expressions, but yeah, maybe not the most academic or proper English.
There is a world with hundreds of job opportunities and many possibilities for you to create your own company. That is the world of programming, which is not just for men or geniuses. It is for everyone. Take the first step towards your professional future with Platzi's basic programming course, where you will learn from scratch and at your own pace the basics you need to master programming. We believe in your talent. The question is, do you? Go to platzi.com/yodesarrollo and find out where your talent can take you.
Everything will give us different perspectives in English. We'll learn different things, but I agree with you. Music in terms of grammar, maybe for some things it helps, but sometimes it can be misleading,
Yes.
right? And I would add one thing to what you mentioned, and it's podcast. As you don't have the visuals, you don't feel the need better to be there, right? To have your phone or your screen in front of you, which is time consuming because you need to dedicate
Yes.
all your attention to it. But just what we mentioned before, if you're cooking, if you're cleaning your house, if you're walking, I don't know, you're on the bus, live in
For
cities.
example.
For example, maybe you don't want to have something to look at, and the podcast gives you that possibility to
It does.
be listening to something that's made for you to only listen. You are not going to miss I want to see what they are talking about. No, everything is done for you to only listen.
It's hands-free.
It's hands-free and eyes-free, I would say.
And you know what? When you mentioned why the bus, for example, which is so common in big cities, that we take buses to our places of work, of study, what better way to utilize that time than to learn something new, interesting via podcast? Because otherwise,
right.
what are we doing? Well, looking outside at the traffic, people walking by. But if we could use those 30 minutes, 40 minutes that we're going to be in the bus to learn something interesting, to practice our listening skills, the pronunciation of native speakers, accents, all of that, then that's time well used.
I agree. Yes, yes, I'm with you. I loved it. And you're learning not only English, but about a topic that interests you, right? So you're
Exactly.
learning two things at once.
Exactly.
That's great. What about the level, G? I want us to now talk about what if I'm just starting, if I'm a beginner? Is it a good idea to learn with podcasts? Is it going to be too difficult? What do you think about that?
I think that maybe a couple of years ago, yes, it would have been difficult. But right now, there's such a big offer of content that there is content specialized for beginners, for intermediates, and for advanced speakers. So I would say that should not be an obstacle for your learning process. I don't think you should be scared of approaching your learning process with podcasts because you're just starting. But I would say that it could be a nice complement to everything else that you're doing in order to reach a higher level. But I think that there's a big offer. There's enough for everybody to learn. That's my opinion, but I think you're the expert. What do you think?
I don't know if I would call myself an expert.
An
but
expert
I do.
listener.
There you go. I'm an expert podcast listener. There you go. I'm going to put that in my LinkedIn.
Please.
English teacher and listen. What was that?
Expert podcast listener.
There you go. Well, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I would add that can help us. I think podcasts can help us to lose that frustration that it can create, not understanding everything. And I speak from my experience learning Portuguese. I've learned most of my Portuguese by listening to podcasts. And
There you go.
there are different accents in Portuguese as there are in any language, right?
Yes.
That's natural. And there is one that is very hard for me because the sounds are farther from Spanish and English sounds.
Okay.
And when I felt ready, I said, this is going to be a challenge, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to listen to this podcast that has a very different accent. And it did help me to start feeling more comfortable in saying, okay, I don't understand everything, but that's okay. It's okay if I don't get it all. I'm not going to be frustrated now if I speak with somebody and I don't understand. And it helped me manage that frustration of not knowing as much. So I think that's a good first step for somebody who is starting to listen, not with the intention of understanding everything, but with the intention of saying, how much can I understand today? I understood 3 words. Yes. Next time I understood 6. I'm improving here, right?
That's progress.
That's right. So I think it can help us to, this is a question that students ask a lot, right? How can I lose that frustration? How can I improve that? And I think this is a good way. Listen to podcasts. You don't have the pressure of the other person waiting for an answer. You can repeat as many times as you want. And you can just, make peace with this idea of I need to understand everything. So I think that's something for beginners that I would say. And for advanced levels, it's a great way to challenge yourself. Go to harder topics like philosophy, history, more specific topics. If you say, I'm understanding very easily, and maybe find different accents, podcasts from different countries, different accents, and you start challenging yourself. So I think it doesn't matter what level you have. You can learn something new and use podcasts for your process.
And I think you just mentioned something that is key and is eliminating not just the pressure and the frustration, but also the fear of speaking with a native speaker, because that's a big one, right? I mean,
that's right.
If it's the first time that you're going to verbalize some sentences, some phrases, probably you're going to feel anxious or scared that they're not going to understand you. But if you start listening on a daily basis or regularly to native speakers talking about a variety of different topics, then next time you are in person with an actual native speaker, I think you'll feel much more relaxed. It's like practicing for the real moment.
I had not thought about it, but I love it. That's true.
I hadn't either, but when you were saying that, I thought, this is practicing for real life scenarios.
I agree. Yeah, totally. I had not thought about it, but yeah, spot on.
You're training your ear.
Yeah, and your confidence. I love that.
Confidence.
And you mentioned something important. It's like real life practice. So I want us to talk a little bit about repetition. That's a strategy that has worked for me that I love. So let's talk a little bit about how repeating and how to what you're listening can help you improve your English.
I see it as a combination of 2 things. I think we shouldn't strive or we shouldn't try to focus on memorizing, because that is one element. But really what you should focus on is strengthening those muscles. To me, it's like training your ear, training your speaking. It's making them stronger. And that's where I think repetition is key. Not just in, I'm going to memorize it. No, because you're not a machine, but use the memory as one of the elements, but make sure that when you repeat, you're doing it intentionally and with an idea of, I'm going to be better at this, not perfect right away, but I'm better at this because I'm practicing it. And again, learning a new language involves learning even new facial movements and mouth movements and where to place your tongue, because these are sounds that maybe you haven't made before. And you would probably feel identified because you're learning Portuguese and it's similar to Spanish, but it's not the same. So
not in the pronunciation.
So I see it more as an exercise. You're training muscles. So a combination of the 2. Okay, I'm improving memory. Yes, of course, that's very valuable. But learning is not about memorizing. That is one element, but it's not the purpose. So see it as training. Like when you go to the gym,
I love it. That's exactly as I say it. Yes. And it helps you in different aspects. Pronunciation of specific words, right?
Yeah.
Because you say, okay, a word like comfortable. That word was so difficult for me to pronounce, I kept saying comfortable. And
I hear that a
listened
lot.
and I was like, I know it's not comfortable, but I can't produce the right sound. It was very difficult for me to learn, as you say, how to move my mouth because we don't have that sound in Spanish, right? So it was a matter of listening to it and repeating and listening and repeating.
Yes.
So that on one side, specific words with specific sounds that we don't have in Spanish.
Yes.
On the other side, the rhythm sometimes, and this is something that students say a lot, like, I want to sound more native. And that's not about the accent, right? Oh, British, American, from New Zealand, from Australia. It's not about that, right? But it's about the rhythm and the intonation of English, right?
Yes.
So identifying how it raises and goes down and all these patterns of intonation, that helps a lot when you are listening and intentionally repeating what you're listening to.
Yes, and where to put the stress in words. That's key. And I think we've talked about this before, and in our classes, I know that this is something that we've mentioned to students as well. But where to put the stress might be even more important than focusing on the accent, because in the end, that's what makes the language understandable for other people. So today, actually, we were talking about that. We were checking the IPA homework. What is the IPA? No, we'll tell you. The International Phonetic Alphabet. And we were seeing examples, and it's not the same to say academy than academy. And we could spell it correctly. We could read the word correctly. We could write it correctly, but it's about where we put the stress that really affects how other people are going to understand the language. So that's key. That's key.
Absolutely. And that's something that it's very easy to gain and to learn through listening to podcasts and repeating.
repetition.
And grammar, what you mentioned, sometimes we think about grammar as I need to learn the rules and I need to know what the subjunctive is and what the present perfect is. And I'm sure you don't even know in Spanish. Maybe you do, Gina, but not you that are listening. But that's not important. The important is to be able to produce a correct sentence, right? And that's something that we gain by repetition. So something that I love doing is when I hear a new structure, I don't know the name. In this moment in Portuguese, it's like, I don't want to know the name. But I do repeat it. So my brain starts interiorizing that structure and I can start replicating it when I speak, right? So I think that repetition helps a lot to improve grammar in a very natural way as well.
Definitely. Again, acquisition. Has not
That's right.
learning through the grammar, through checking all the rules. Where does this go? But acquisition, acquiring it through exposure, to practice, through repetition.
Definitely. Gee, I love this topic because I really do love teaching. I really do love talking about learning languages, and I love podcasts. So this is going to be one of my favorite podcasts from now on. But we need to start getting to an end here. So I have one last question before we finish. And it's, back in the time, I did not have a smartphone, at least. So we learned with audiobooks. That was their way to listen to something, right?
Yes.
Apart from movies and music. So what would you say is the difference there?
I think, well, actually, I tried listening to an audiobook a couple of months ago, and I didn't follow through. I think and here's where I want to make the analysis or the difference between these two resources. And it's that it was too long. It was, I think, maybe 2 hours and a half long, the audiobook. And even though the topic was interesting, I felt at that moment that I wanted content that I could absorb on a daily basis, but that didn't feel so dense, or that it felt almost never ending, if that makes sense, you know? So I think that an audiobook requires a lot more commitment, yes, and compromise to the topic because yes, you're going to learn a lot of different things here and there, but in the end, it revolves around one narrative, right? It's an audiobook. An author put a lot of effort into making sure that it was specialized content about one main topic. Whereas with podcasts, well, most episodes last less than 30 minutes, right? You can find
Most of
podcasts
them.
like 20 minutes to 30 minutes. So they're much more, I would say, not easy, but simple to consume on a daily basis. Of course, you could take one audiobook and listen 20 minutes every day. Yes, that's right. But for me in particular, I found that having these small bites of content is much more exciting, and it keeps my interest. Knowing that I'm going to consume something, okay, nice, I learned, and then tomorrow I'll have something new, I'll have something different or a little bit different. So to me, that would be one of the main differences. The audiobook requires much more time and commitment and discipline, because if you want to finish it, then it's going to be at least 2 hours. I think that's what most audiobooks can last.
If it's a small one, yeah.
If it's a small one, at least 2 hours. Whereas podcast, it's 30 minutes of your life and you took something very valuable, and then tomorrow you have a new offer, something else that you can learn. So that would be like the main difference for me, but I don't know how you have felt the difference between the two.
I think you covered the important points there, because I do like listening to audiobooks. I've done it with novels, like I've heard complete novels. But definitely a podcast is something quick. It's a specific topic. Yes, you go from beginning to end in, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Those are the longest podcasts that I know of, 1 hour, and that's it. So I would say that's the big difference. And of course, a book, well, it's a book, it's a novel, it's about one specific topic. A podcast, you can just jump episodes and you don't need to go in order, right? So I do think they give a little bit more flexibility. Maybe in a next episode, we should talk about learning English with audiobooks, because that's another great tool. Not the one we're talking about today, but we should do it.
Consider it, yes.
Yeah. Okay, G, thank you so much for your time, for all these reflections and tips, because podcasts are a great tool to learn English, and I hope everything that we are sharing today helps everyone who is listening to this episode, and helps them, that you start applying this and you can start using podcast as one of your main tools to learn English, or to continue learning English if you're already learning, of course.
Yes, and hopefully our podcasts, because we produce them with a lot of love.
That's true, with a lot of love, I must say, yes. Actually, you reminded me, I'm going to mention this here. John and I recorded a podcast about podcasts, but not about learning English with podcasts, just about podcasts
in general.
Because I love podcasts, Next time I'll let you know. So I invite you all to listen to it as well if you're a podcast fan, and of course to listen to all our podcasts in English Academy.
Yes, every week, right? We have a new launch. I recently recorded something interesting as well, so make sure that you check it out.
Absolutely.
And give us your feedback.
Yes, and let us know what you want us to talk about. We're more than happy to, keep talking about those topics that interest you. We'll learn as well about them. Okay, thank you for listening to English in Action. Next week, we will have a brand new podcast episode. Go to platzi.com/learnpodcast and watch a free class. It will be available for 7 days. Till next time, bye.
Bye-bye.
This was English Academy, Platzi's English podcast. Thanks for listening. Share this podcast if you liked it, and let us know which topics you would like for us to discuss in future episodes by going on Twitter and using the hashtag PlatziEnglish.